Hey everybody, I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, and in this wizard build video for the game of Frostgrave, I'll be creating two wizards that are both out-of-game specialists as I try to maximize the number of these spells they both know while still making them functionally viable during a game. In this video, I'll show you both spell lists, discuss the strategies the wizards will use, recommend some soldiers to hire, and give my thoughts about using these builds in a game. I personally think out-of-game spells are really useful, and I've created a video about them that's linked in the description. So let's get to the bricks and blocks of using some of these spells to build out-of-game specialists. In the first edition of Frostgrave, it was possible to make a starting Sigilist without any spells that could be cast during the game. But with changes to some spells and removals of others with the second edition, it's no longer possible to do this. However, there are two schools in second edition that can choose 7 out-of-game spells to start with. And I think they can both be viable builds, mostly just by spamming their in-game options. The first build is once again a Sigilist. With the loss of Create Grimoire, Push is selected. I've talked a lot about this spell on this channel, as it has a lot of different uses. It can move friend or foe, get figures out of combat, and not just knock figures off terrain, but send them flying into the air to suffer massive amounts of damage. And it's super easy to cast, especially for a Sigilist needing only an 8. Also, the plus 10 attack it generates makes it fairly reliable for winning most combat rolls. Just remember, this attack only causes movement and not damage, unless the figure falls off something. This spell can be spammed by any spellcaster that knows it, as there's almost always a good target to use it on. So it works well as the only in-game option this build has. A lot of the out-of-game spells this build has focus on soldiers. First, they have Animal Companion, casting on a 12, and allows the warband to add bears instead of 2 of their standard soldiers that can take pressure off the limited spellcasters in battle. They have the aligned Animate Construct, casting on a 12, though it does have some penalties depending on what size of construct is being created. However, I'd recommend a high-risk, high-reward approach with trying to animate large constructs. And if you want to create some interesting constructs, check out my overview of the Fireheart supplement, which introduces modifications for them. Or get some ideas by checking out my wizard build that uses that book to create a construct-filled warband. Next, they have the aligned Illusionary Soldier, casting on a 14. In second edition, this spell gained the added function to be cast in-game as a touch spell. So it kind of cheats in this build, but there's no other out-of-game illusion spell, so this one is here. Since the spellcaster's options will be limited, having an extra figure, even if they can't do damage, and they die if they take any damage themselves, is welcome. And the aligned Miraculous Cure, which is unreliable, casting on an 18, and can only be cast by a wizard, has the potential to save some money, or an apprentice, if poor survival results are rolled. And it can restore permanent injuries a spellcaster might suffer. Something interesting is there's nothing I've found in the book, the FAQ, or anywhere online that says that constructs can't be affected by this spell. Though players should discuss this because using it that way seems a little silly. And this wizard could have selected Raise Zombie to further add to their soldier focus, but this is another one that can be cast both out of game and in game. So they've selected Reveal Secret, casting on a 16. This can either help with increasing money and finding magic equipment, or if a player is just trying to start without many in-game options and wants to add some later, this can help a player find grimoires, which I think would actually be pretty fun to see what kind of strategy the wizard develops as they collect and learn random spells over the course of a campaign, instead of having a predetermined strategy during the creation process. And to help with learning new spells, the in-school Absorb Knowledge, casting on a 12, will potentially increase experience points gained after each battle. Lastly, they have Right Scroll, casting on a 12. This is a great spell, which I discuss in detail in my video about the best Sigilist spell, but in this build, there's no specific spell that needs scrolls for the overall strategy. So this can be used however the player decides, possibly to ensure they add a bear or a construct to their team, or to add some reliability to a miraculous cure casting. The second out-of-game wizard I'm highlighting is a Witch, which is the only school in 2nd edition Frostgrave with 3 out-of-game spells. So they have the aligned Leap, casting on just a 10, that will be their spammable spell, as it's a great way to get soldiers into action, and more reliably than push, and it can easily be used to move treasure grabbers toward a table edge, though hauling treasure does reduce the overall movement distance. Like the first build, this one also uses Animal Companion, casting on a 10 for them, Animate Construct, casting on a 12, Right Scroll, casting on a 16, and the neutral Illusionary Soldier, casting on a 16, which could be replaced by the out-of-game only Miraculous Cure, but with a neutral casting number of 20 and being restricted just to wizards, I decided against it. And this group of spells can be used in the same way the Sigilists use them. However, adding bears and large constructs to this team is even more powerful combined with Leap to move them into battle. Unlike the last build, this one does no Raised Zombie, casting on a 12, as it's the only out-of-game option from the aligned Necromancy school. So altogether, this warband has the potential for containing a lot of allies that aren't on the regular soldier tables. These spellcasters also know Brew Potion, casting on a 12, which, for once in my builds, shouldn't be used for farming gold crowns. As there's so many free soldiers the warband can get, money won't be much of a problem. So they should brew up explosive cocktails, healing potions, or really whatever the player wants to help on the battlefield. Just remember that bears and constructs can't benefit from potions. And finally, they know Familiar, casting on a 10. This gives some bonus health to the spellcasters, which I usually appreciate when a lot of empowerment is going to be needed. With Leap casting so easily though, this won't be as much of a problem, but extra health is always welcome. For soldiers, I'd recommend the same lineup for both wizard builds. Ideally, both warbands should eventually contain 2 bears and 2 large constructs. So they should start with 4 thugs as placeholders for these soldiers. And after spending money on an apprentice, they should hire 2 infantrymen and 2 treasure hunters. These 2 fast soldiers will be the main treasure grabbers for the team. But when they die, they should be replaced with rangers to continue to grab treasures and add some ranged support to all the high-powered melee fighters that will hopefully be in the warband after a few games. For spell improvement during a campaign, both wizards should focus on their in-game options of push or leap, as well as illusionary soldier and raised zombie. But none should be improved down to 6, as they would no longer grant experience points when successfully used. And then it's really up to the player as far as which out-of-game strategy or newly learned spell they want to focus on. And since empowerment shouldn't be needed much, I'd max out the fight stat instead of health as soon as possible to help the spellcasters fend off arrows and ambushes. As far as my opinion about these builds, I think they'd both be really interesting to play, especially with the idea of seeing which grimoires they happen to find and building their strategy based around that randomness. But even without that, I think both builds will perform well in a campaign. All the out-of-game spells can add some nice bonuses without costing precious in-game actions, and while spamming push and leap could get a bit boring over time, it's a really powerful tactic that makes these viable options for players that want to try out some unique wizard builds. Let me know in the comments your thoughts about these 2 wizards and the idea of focusing on out-of-game spells. I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming. Thanks for watching and play well.